Folks, week 17, day 3 of our New Testament of the year. We're in Matthew chapter 15. Would encourage you that if you have not read it yet to hit pause, read the chapter, and come back. And Jesus is in the northern Sea of Galilee area, and it says the Pharisees and scribes came to Jesus from Jerusalem. So it must be a big deal for the scribes and Pharisees to come all the way from Jerusalem to the Gennesaret region, the Galilee region. Most estimate that would have been a 50 or 60 mile walk. So a big deal. They're coming up to ask Jesus a question about Jesus' disciples not washing their hands when they ate. The big issue here is not so much the washing of the hands to eat, it's they were not doing the ceremonial washings that the Pharisees and scribes would have required at the time. Jesus calls them out, that basically saying, hey, you guys are hypocrites. You don't do the tradition of honoring your father and mother. This goes back to where the Pharisees or scribes would call something that is a possession or resources and say, hey, this has been given to God, so I don't have to use these resources to care for my parents. So they're working around some of the law through some of the legalism stuff. And then Jesus shares that it's not what goes in, it's not the ceremonial washings, it's not the food that goes into your mouth that defiles a person, but it's what comes out of the heart that defiles somebody. This is insulting to the Pharisees, very much against what they were teaching, and so we see this conflict continuing to brew between the religious leaders and Jesus. And Jesus, stresses that people are defiled from what comes from the inside, because it comes from the heart, which is evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false witness, slander. That is what defiles a person, not a food or an external hand washing or washings, ceremonial washings. And then we see an interesting little snippet on 21 to 28 of this centurion, or this Canaanite woman that comes to Jesus, whose daughter is oppressed by a demon. And she recognizes Jesus as to who he is. She goes, "O Lord, Son of David." So recognizes and calls on Jesus as a Jew, as a believing Jew would call on Jesus. And Jesus is silent, and it's an interesting section. The disciples finally say, hey, send her away, for she is crying out after us. So basically, hey, Jesus, get rid of her. We're tired of listening to her. And whether they said, heal her, send her on, or just get rid of her, we don't know for sure. Jesus answers, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, saying that, hey, his focus of his ministry is strictly the Jews in the house of Israel that are wandering, and she comes before him. So some would say Jesus' silence, Jesus' comment is just allowing her to show her faith even more. And she comes before her simply saying, Lord, help me. And then Jesus' reply has caused me trouble for many years. It is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. So it seems like an incredibly harsh statement, but some of what I've read said there are really a few terms for dogs. The Pharisees, the Jews, would have called the Gentiles dogs, and in a very derogatory term, but this term is not quite as derogatory and talks about little dogs. and more of the dogs that would be more type of pet type of dogs. And but we aren't sure. But she replies, "Yes, Lord, but even the dogs get to eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." So Jesus recognizes her great faith and heals her daughter instantly from afar. So just a great little snippet of some great faith. It's the second time in Matthew that someone has been called to have great faith. The first was in Matthew 8 with the Roman centurion who wanted his son to be healed, and Jesus referred to that as a person of great faith. And now this Canaanite woman. So in both instances, the great faith was bestowed to a non-Jew, to a Gentile, and that would have been pretty radical at the time. Then we see another snippet of healing in 29 to 31. The mute speaking, crippled are healed, lame are walking, blind are seeing. So just a multitude of healings going on. And then another food miracle, feeding of the 4,000. And just yesterday, I believe, Jesus fed 5,000. There's a lot of discussion. Is this just being retold from a different perspective, different numbers perhaps, or a different viewpoint, or is this a second healing? I believe it's a second healing. There are so many different details that it seems to make sense to me. It could be a second feeding. I am really surprised at the disciples, if this is a second feeding, the disciples' slowness in understanding, and that they wouldn't look back just a few days and see, hey, Jesus was able to feed them a couple days ago. He can certainly do it again. And then I realize how slow I am at understanding, and can see Jesus work in my life in one instance, and then doubt and wonder and not believe in the next instance. So that concludes that chapter. It's kind of cool to look at the structure of this chapter, that Jesus is confronting ceremonial washings, external washings. He's confronting food laws. It's not the washings that matter. It's not the food laws that matter. It's what comes from inside that matters. And then deals with the Canaanite woman, a non-Jew. So as we talked about during the Sermon on the Mount, that Jesus is upside down kingdom, that everything's going to be different. And he is really showing that in this passage, that it's not about food laws. It's not about ceremonial washings. It's not about religious ceremonies. It's not about even the race you were born into. It is a whole new kingdom that starts from the heart, and it starts through faith in Jesus. So have a great day, and I hope to see you on here tomorrow as we look at Matthew chapter 16.